papering over. I think it's about striking the balance between part of the story of slavery is the horrendous conditions, the inhumanity of it. Part of it is a story of emancipation in a country striving to live out its ideals.
Which took
through the civil rights
much
movement.
blood,
Exactly.
sweat, and tears
we
to
fought,
even get for it. And people still don't have, like,
there are people who still fly
I understand
the
where you're
flag
trying
that
to
didn't
go,
want
but
us
I don't think that's
emancipated.
right. I just
There are people who still fly that flag that don't want us emancipated. In my lifetime, as an adult, that flag was still the state flag of South Carolina. So we can tell the story of emancipation.
Flag. I'm from the north.
Yeah,
we were victorious
we can
in this
tell
battle.
the story of emancipation, but as somebody whose lineage comes from those who were emancipated, I want the whole story told.
Our future is informed by our past, both the failures to live up to our deals, the places where we did.
The Trump administration wants warning labels on Smithsonian exhibits about slavery and indigenous communities. Not because the exhibits are false, because they are accurate. The administration calls that ideological capture. Historians call it their job. Today, we break down why sanitizing history does not just distort the past, it controls the present. Let's get into it.
The Trump administration is escalating its feud with the Smithsonian. It's slapping warning labels on the National Museum of American History. Those signs will warn about, quote, ideological capture at America's museum, and it'll tell visitors that exhibits should be renovated. Earlier this month, the White House claimed in a report that the museum was erasing American heritage, not preserving it. The Smithsonian hasn't commented on those warning labels, but previously its leaders said that the White House had mischaracterized the museum. We have some new faces at the table: Sarah Fisher, Sabrina Singh, and Katie Frost. The first thing that really comes to mind when I hear about something like this is, isn't this what they do in tin pot dictatorships, where they try to control the history and the information that people learn and try to steer them toward a version of history that they would prefer?
Well, it's very important that we have an accurate representation of history. And unfortunately, history is increasingly becoming politicized. You have one side wants to tell their version of history, another side has an alternative way of framing the history. But we should be able to agree on some basic facts. And if things are being framed in a negative light that reflects poorly in the United States, the opinion of the Trump administration, I understand why they would think that and why they'd want to do it.
That's not about facts. That's a beef about, you want a positive portrayal, whereas the other version has information that you may not like, that may be negative, but it's not inaccurate. I mean, I've yet to see any examples that they've pointed out to any inaccuracies.
Well, I've seen them talk.
Shouldn't that matter?
Facts matter, but the way they're framing it is also an important element. I mean, we're all political here. We understand how, yes, when you're arguing the facts, but how do you frame that? How do you share it?
Why should all of American history be positive?
What do you find factually inaccurate about what's at the American History Museum?
Well, I will go ahead and acknowledge I do not spend a lot of time at the American History Museum. Like, I don't think a lot of us do go to the
But I don't
that
think,
often.
I think a majority of the people, when you go to that museum, and what the problem here is with the Trump administration's argument about putting up these signs is, like, give me the argument of what is wrong, or like what is displayed here that is factually inaccurate or a mistelling of the history. Because I'm willing to take your point that everyone has a side of how to tell a version of their history, but a museum is a museum. It's meant to preserve the facts of our nation. And to Abby's point, I mean, you see this in countries around the world who try and rewrite their history to paint it in a different light for the person who's in power. So I take your point, but I would ask you, of all the displays in that museum, and there are many, hundreds,
massive,
point out one that is inaccurate.
And they're not new displays.
Correct.
That were just written.
They are not.
The Smithsonian, these are experts that are historians, archaeologists who have spent their careers studying the history of this country. And I would actually argue most are not political beings.
Non-partisan.
They are.
Hence why we're working in the field today. But I think, the point I like to make is, tin pot dictatorships would gather up all the history books, put them in a pile, and burn them.
Yeah, they're banning. They're just banning them.
They're
just banning.
Yeah, they're banning books now.
The warning label, as I see it, is that
they're banning books.
I don't like it, but it's like
the warning label, from my perspective, is meant to sow distrust in the Smithsonian as an institution. If you're having people go to the Smithsonian and you have warning labels saying you can't trust what is here, this is not an accurate representation, that is sending a signal that you can't trust any of the historical institutions or museums in the United States, which is a soft power move by the administration to help sort of rewrite history the way that they want it to. It doesn't seem that different to me, quite frankly, with what they're doing at the Kennedy Center.
Yeah.
It's all about just creating an
Rewriting.
environment where people don't necessarily trust the art institutions, the history institutions, the cultural institutions that have for long been bipartisan.
I would actually argue it's a lot more of, hey, and to your point, we don't know the exact exhibits that are under question or being able to argue that point. But having somebody say, hey, if I'm going to write the descriptor of this, you need to be able to defend that to a Republican and to a Democrat. And that can be a hard thing to do. But putting that through the idea of, I don't just want this to be a jury
we do
of
know
my
some of
peers.
Trump 1 didn't have an issue with
know
it.
Yeah,
Bush
why is
didn't
it-
have an
I
issue
guess
with
why
it.
is it
Reagan
hard
didn't
to
have
do
an issue
now,
with
but
it.
it hasn't
Also,
been
George
for
H.W.
decades?
Bush didn't have an
What I'm
issue with
saying
it.
is, if your idea is I'm writing this for the approval of people who are within my same thought group, you are going to inherently not be trying to understand how somebody else may react to it.
Let's start with what the administration is actually proposing. Because the language matters, and warning labels sounds mild until you understand what it means in context. The Smithsonian National Museum of American History contains exhibits documenting the lived experiences of enslaved people and indigenous communities during the periods of American history that shaped this country's economic, political, and cultural foundation. These exhibits are not editorials. They are historical records drawn from primary sources: letters, photographs, artifacts, oral histories, legal documents. The administration's position is that these exhibits reflect ideological capture, that presenting the documented experience of people who were enslaved and dispossessed is itself a form of political bias that requires correction through warning labels and reframing toward positive American heritage. That argument requires believing that accurate historical documentation is ideology and that the comfortable narrative, the one that minimizes suffering and emphasizes aspiration, is neutrality. It is not neutrality. It is a choice. And it is a choice with a long history of being made specifically to protect the people whose ancestors benefited from the systems being documented.
I actually think you are right in the sense that these exhibits do need to speak to a wide array of people. But I think that actually is exactly the thing that Trump doesn't like the most. One of the things that these exhibits do that I think they dislike is that it includes the perspectives of other individuals, Black Americans who are descendants of slaves, Indigenous people who experience the other side of the creation of this nation. It includes a lot of different perspectives that to Trump is negative. It's a negative portrayal. So I actually think that that's what you're suggesting is exactly what the museum is trying to do, which is to say there are a lot of different ways of looking at how this went down. And for if you were Black at the creation of this nation, this is what it looked like for you. If you were Indigenous, this is what it looked like for you. And to Trump, that is, according to him in a 2025 post, an out-of-control Smithsonian where everything discussed is how horrible the country was, how bad slavery was, how unaccomplished and downtrodden it was, nothing about success, nothing about brightness, nothing about future. That is what Trump wants is the perspective of just one person. The white man.
The white man.
At that
exactly. And that's what, when we don't know all of the exhibits in question, but we do know many of them, particularly the African American Museum was one of the first to go under attack because it told the true story of Black people in this country.
They also put out
But
that
the politeness
elements of
is-
white
yeah,
culture
elements
being
is-
punctuality.
Well, that was not, just to be clear, not in the African American History Museum. That was a different.
But that was propagated by the Smithsonian. It was maybe not created by them. It was something implicitly endorsed by them that I found just incredibly offensive at what that implied.
you know what? I also think
we can acknowledge, though, that there are things like that for sure went too far.
Demanding balance between slavery and emancipation sounds reasonable until you follow the timeline. Emancipation leads to Reconstruction, which was systematically dismantled. Reconstruction leads to Jim Crow. Jim Crow leads to redlining. Redlining leads to the wealth gap. The true unvarnished history does not improve as you extend the timeline. The balance argument only works if you stop the story before it gets to what came next. Peter's position on this panel was the most internally honest conservative argument available, and it still did not survive contact with the basic function of a museum. He argued that history has become too negative, that focusing heavily on slavery reflects poorly on the United States, and that context about emancipation and the country's aspirations should accompany the documentation of its failures. The opposing panelists made the response that should have ended the debate. A museum's job is not to make viewers feel good about their country. A museum's job is to present historical evidence accurately so that viewers understand what happened. The Smithsonian is not a theme park. It is a national repository of documented history. The suggestion that its exhibits require balance in the same way a political debate requires balance fundamentally misunderstands what historical institutions are for. The Holocaust comparison surfaced on this panel, and it is worth engaging with seriously rather than treating it as rhetorical excess. There is global consensus that Holocaust memory must be preserved in its full horror. Museums dedicated to that history do not balance documentation of the gas chambers with stories of German industrial innovation. They document what happened with precision and comprehensiveness, because the argument, never again, only holds if what happened is known clearly. The argument for sanitizing American history about slavery sits in direct contradiction to the consensus about Holocaust memory. Either we believe that documenting atrocities in their full historical specificity serves an essential social function, or we do not. The administration cannot coherently argue both that Holocaust memory must be protected and that slavery exhibits require warning labels for being too negative. The principle is the same. The difference is whose ancestors are being implicated. The weaponized ignorance argument is the one that deserves the most sustained attention, because it explains why this is not an academic debate about museum curation. When people do not understand the historical mechanisms that produce current inequalities, when they do not know that the racial wealth gap is a direct consequence of legally enforced economic exclusion, redlining, discriminatory lending, and asset stripping that operated within living memory, they look at present-day inequality and reach the wrong conclusion. They conclude that the disparity reflects something about the people experiencing it rather than something about the systems that produced it. That conclusion then becomes the justification for policies that perpetuate the inequality. The ignorance is not accidental. It is functional. Keeping people unaware of historical context ensures that systemic inequality can continue to be misread as individual failure. And misreading it as individual failure ensures that the systems producing it face no accountability. The administration knows this. The people pushing for warning labels on slavery exhibits are not confused about history. They are protecting a narrative in which America is a meritocracy where outcomes reflect effort and character rather than history and structure. A narrative in which the racial wealth gap is a personal failure rather than a policy outcome. A narrative in which the museum's job is to validate American exceptionalism rather than to document American reality. Warning labels on slavery exhibits are not about balance. They are about maintaining the conditions under which that narrative can be sustained.
From taking down exhibits about slavery because you're like,
taking the issue
why
of
are we showing the badness? Because it happened.
Well,
and it was bad. And it was bad. And it should never happen again.
100%.
And would we ever want to take down the things that happened in the Holocaust? I would hope not. We should not want to take down the things about the Trail of Tears. We should not want to take down the things that happened in slavery. And we have to be honest. And if we are not honest, we are potentially destined to repeat them. That is why you teach history in a non-political way. Because what Donald Trump actually think is doing is trying to lay breadcrumbs so his history is also told through his lens and not through truth. And that could be problematic.
Well, I just have to respectfully say that when we were talking about this is what happens in dictatorships, if this truly is what was happening in America, you would not have seen the White House Correspondents' Dinner tonight. You would not see the leader go there and stand there and applaud and smile and shake hands with people who are receiving awards for writing very negative and critical things.
They just said that in the New York Times.
I will say, no, it actually starts that way.
That is a very selective view of what happened tonight. President Trump also spent a lot of time bashing reporters that he didn't like, calling them names, targeting people for his weight, criticizing his opponents, saying that the press relies on him and that they take his... So, like, I hear you. But at the same time, this was a moment in America's 250th anniversary to praise freedom of speech as a foundation of our country, and that did not happen tonight. I think, though, one thing here, you cannot take what's happening at the Smithsonian in a vacuum. Like, we've seen other instances in other institutions where military officers who were people of color, their photos were removed from the walls.
Yep.
So we now understand that this is something that the administration does. So even though we don't know the exact parts of the Smithsonian that are being targeted, we can't say, oh, this in a vacuum. We have no idea of what this could be because we kind of do have.
I think Sarah's right to that point on just the, like, this is not just Trump. It's like his administration trying to rewrite and whitewash so many of the accomplishments of people of color that have contributed to our nation's history, but also trying to downplay the horridness that our nation was founded on. And to Ashley's point, you can't. That's what the museum is for.
And I don't understand why. It is like such an easy thing to just be like, it is horrible. Let's always call it horrible, and let's commit to never do it again. Yeah. That is a very easy posture to have, and you don't need to get rid of it to be able to do that.
You know what's interesting? Because you brought up the Holocaust. I mean, there are some elements of the right who have actually said that about modern day Germany, that they spend too much time dwelling on the horrors of the Holocaust, and it has been allowed to override the long history of the German people.
Are we transitioning Graham Plattner right now?
Yeah, I was about to say.
No. I'm talking about people like Elon Musk. I mean, he said that explicitly. There is a viewpoint that there is an overemphasis on the bad parts of history in general. But I mean, I think that we would take that idea about Germany and we'd say that's insane. That's ridiculous.
That's
you can't
crazy.
paper over the Holocaust. I don't understand why it's even okay to have the conversation about papering over slavery in this country.
But I disagree that any of this is papering over. I think it's about striking the balance between part of the story of slavery is the horrendous conditions, the inhumanity of it. Part of it is a story of emancipation in a country striving to live out its ideals.
Which took
through the
so much blood, sweat, and tears
we
to even get for, and people still don't have, like,
there are people who still fly
I understand
the
where you're
flag
trying
that
to
didn't
go,
want
but
us
I don't think that's
emancipated.
right.
There are people who still fly that flag that don't want us emancipated. In my lifetime as an adult, that flag was still the state flag of South Carolina. So we can tell the story of emancipation.
Flag. I'm from the north.
Yeah,
we were victorious
we can
in this
tell
battle.
the story of emancipation, but as somebody whose lineage comes from those who were emancipated, I want the whole story told.
Our future is informed by our past, both the failures to live up to our ideals, the places where we did, but the fact that we're striving towards it and striking a balance between the failures, the successes, and where we want to go. That's what we should be doing.
All right, we're going to leave it there.
What the administration is proposing to do to the Smithsonian is not a policy disagreement about museum curation. It is an attempt to use federal authority over a federally funded institution to reshape what Americans know about their own history, specifically to minimize the documented experience of the people whose suffering built the economic foundation that everyone else inherited. That is not a neutral act. It is a political one, and the politics it serves are not complicated to identify. The panelist who compared this to tin pot dictatorships was not being hyperbolic. The rewriting of national history to protect the powerful and erase the marginalized is one of the most consistent features of authoritarian governance across every culture and every era. It is always done in the name of positive framing, national pride, or heritage preservation. It always targets the same histories, the ones that document what was done to people who had no power to resist it, and it always serves the same function, ensuring that the people who benefited from those systems can continue to tell a story about their country in which the systems are not the story. The museum's exhibits are not the problem. They are the answer to the problem. The problem is that the answer makes certain people uncomfortable. And discomfort with documented history is not a reason to warn visitors about it. It is a reason to sit with it until the discomfort produces something more useful than a label. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Smithsonian will capitulate to the pressure or hold its curatorial standards? And what does it tell you about an administration that is comfortable with Holocaust museums but wants warning labels on slavery exhibits? Subscribe to the debate, Chaz. We will keep reading the history that the warning labels are designed to make optional.